I caught my wife leaving in the middle of the party in her boss's car, so I followed them, and when she saw me she froze, and I understood everything without needing a word. I saw the two of them in the parking lot, laughing, until she opened the door and found me there. I turned my back in silence and, that night, I ended our story. "You destroyed more than a marriage," was all I could say. The truth is, nobody prepares for the moment when everything collapses. You don't wake up on a Sunday expecting to see the woman who shares your bed, your plans, your silences, and your fears, smiling as she gets into another man's car. You don't expect the woman who held your hand when your father died, or whom you hugged when she lost her job, to simply turn her gaze away from everything you've built and throw herself into something so low, so dirty, so ephemeral. I never thought I would feel what I felt that night. It wasn't just pain, it was a dizziness, a loss of footing so sudden that my body reacted before my mind. My eyes didn't blink, my voice wouldn't come out, my heart didn't know whether to beat or stop. I stood there, still, motionless, while her laughter filled the space between the cars, while she smiled at another man with the eyes that once swore love only to me. And when she finally saw me, when our eyes met, I knew. I didn't need to ask anything. There was nothing to discuss. She had made a choice. And I made mine too. The silence that followed that moment was deafening. She wanted to say something, but there weren't enough words in the world to mend what had been broken. She opened her mouth and closed it, like someone trying to reach a time that has already passed. Her boss remained seated, looking at his cell phone as if it were just another normal day. As if he hadn't just ruined a home. I simply turned my back and walked to my car. The sound of my footsteps echoed inside my chest like drums. When I closed the car door, I left behind not only my wife. I left behind my years, my dreams, my foundation. And that night, although it was the end of our marriage, was also the beginning of something she could never have imagined, the moment she would lose the right to call me mine. That morning, as I drove aimlessly through the streets we used to cross together, with the window open and the dry wind cutting my face, I thought about every little moment that preceded the disaster. The times she arrived late, the messages she deleted too quickly, the distracted glance during dinner, the touch that became rare, the absence even when she was present. I wished I hadn't noticed, but my body knew. Our hearts always know before our heads accept it. And even so, I refused to see. I thought it was a phase, tiredness, routine. But it wasn't. It was disinterest, it was abandonment, it was betrayal in subtle gestures. She had already left me long before that car. The following weeks were a dark hole. The house, once full of small noises, the hairdryer, the coffee brewing, slippers dragging in the hallway, became a tomb. And the silence there was a reminder that she had left even before packing her bags. She tried to talk to me again. She sent empty messages, short phrases, pathetic emojis that sounded like insults in the face of the depth of what she had broken. Once she wrote, "Can we talk?" I left it unread. What did she want? For me to tell her how much it hurt? For me to say that I still loved her despite everything? To beg her to come back? No. I wouldn't be that man. Because I finally understood that love needs to be a choice. And when someone chooses to leave you even when you've given everything, even when you were there on the days when even she doubted herself, that's not love. It's selfishness. And loving someone who only loves themselves is the fastest path to the abyss. So I started walking. One step at a time. I gradually cut the ties. I took our photos off the shelf, deleted our videos, donated the coats she left hanging in the entryway. I let her toothbrush fall in the trash like burying a dead person. I began to relearn who I was without her. And even though it still hurt, each day it hurt less. And that's how I met someone. It didn't happen like in the movies, it was slow, unexpected, almost shy. A glance exchanged in the supermarket queue, a comment about the weather, a casual coffee. But there was something different there. It was light. It was quietly intense. It was a genuine presence. She didn't make me forget the pain, she made me remember who I was before the pain. And for the first time in months, I truly laughed. A clean, honest laugh that didn't need to hide fractures. Months later, already in another place, in another phase of her life, she contacted me. She appeared suddenly, like an untimely storm. Her eyes were swollen, her makeup was smudged, and her voice held a mix of guilt and despair. She said she needed to talk to me. That she regretted it. That everything had been a mistake. That he didn't want commitment. That he had discarded her. That she was alone. And that I was the love of her life. She talked, and in the end, when she expected me to say something, I just looked at her and said, I forgive you. But not for you. For me. She wanted to know if there was a chance, if there was still an open door, any feelings left. I said that what we experienced was real, but that it was over. That love, when broken in two, doesn't mend the same way. She cried. I took a deep breath. And I left. Because forgiving doesn't mean going back. It means moving on lightly. It means leaving the past where it belongs. And she stood there, on the sidewalk, watching the man she once called the love of her life walk away. But now I was the love of someone else's life. The curious thing is that, some time later, she saw me again. I was with my new partner in a park. We had her daughter on our shoulders, laughing loudly, playing with soap bubbles. And for the first time, she understood what she had lost. It wasn't just a husband. It was a home. It was complete love. It was the only place in the world where she was accepted even on her bad days. And that, she traded for a car with tinted windows and empty promises. But what she doesn't know, what nobody knows, is what I said to my new companion that same afternoon, while we watched the bubbles float in the wind, and her daughter's small hand held mine as if holding the world. What I said there, in that silent moment, was more than a new beginning. And maybe, just maybe, that's what's still keeping her awake at night. And this story doesn't end here. Welcome to the channel. Here, we don't romanticize or justify any kind of betrayal. The stories you'll hear are fictional, but they carry profound truths, because betrayal destroys, corrodes, and leaves scars that even time cannot erase. Our goal is to show, with each narrative, the real price of breaking the trust of those who love us. Get ready. What you are about to hear is an intense, painful, and unforgettable story. Good story. The light brick house on the quiet street seemed straight out of a catalogue of perfect life. The always neatly trimmed lawn, the bicycle leaning against the side of the garage, and the yellow porch lights lit every night gave an impression of coziness, stability, and deeply rooted love. Daniel and Emily lived there, married for 8 years, together for 11. They met on a rainy autumn afternoon, both waiting for the same bus to return from a job interview. The bus delay led to a conversation long enough for them to exchange numbers, and their first phone call happened that same night. What began as a coincidence turned into history. Long walks, shared coffees on Sundays, plans built amidst one difficulty after another. Neither of them was perfect, but they had learned to choose each other even on the days when love seemed most weary. Daniel was an operations manager at a logistics company and always had a reserved, almost restrained demeanor. The kind of man who listens more than he speaks, who observes before acting. Emily, on the other hand, was expansive, passionate about art, a literature teacher, and possessed an energy that sometimes filled more than just the space, it filled the air. Their house, though modest, was a reflection of their time together. Paintings by Emily adorned the walls, and books were piled on the living room floor, next to the armchair that Daniel insisted needed replacing, but which remained there because it was where Emily liked to sit and read aloud to him on winter nights. Arguments happened, as in any long relationship, but nothing that couldn't be resolved with a serious conversation or a hug in the middle of the night. They had learned, over time, not to go to sleep without at least trying to understand each other. And perhaps that was what made Daniel believe that, despite everything, they were safe, that their love could withstand the pressures of daily life, the bills, the silent weariness, the brief disagreements. They didn't have children, but they talked about it as something possible, something that would come at the right time, like the next chapter of a book that was still being written calmly. Their routine was simple, yet full of meaning. Breakfast at 7, she would leave for the school where she taught, and he would leave for work shortly after. They had dinner together almost every night, even if it was just a random pizza with old movies playing on TV. Emily used to laugh loudly at the jokes he barely finished, and Daniel liked to watch her dance in the kitchen when she put on her playlists from years past. To an outsider, they were a solid couple. To Daniel, they were a story constantly being built. Emily, however, carried a look that sometimes got lost in the middle of her words. It wasn't disinterest, but a weariness that came unannounced, as if something inside her was searching for something she herself couldn't name. There was a restlessness in Emily that Daniel noticed but couldn't decipher. The way she lingered in the shower, how she spent more time on her phone at night, how she seemed to smile less for no reason. But he attributed it to the accumulation of work, the stress of the end of the semester, the demands of school, and the small dreams she had set aside to accompany him in decisions that were made along the way. Even so, he continued to choose to love in the way he knew how, offering presence, patience, and trying to be the support she had always been for him in difficult times. They weren't a perfect couple, but they had a beautiful story. And Daniel believed that was enough. Their social life revolved around dinners with friends, nephews' birthdays, and occasional short trips during long weekends. Emily stood out in conversations, always with an engaging story or a witty comment. Daniel enjoyed watching how captivating she was. It was as if the world became lighter around her. When it was just the two of them, she said she felt safe with him. And he believed her. He believed her because he always had the feeling that Emily was grateful for everything they had built, for the kind of love that endures through routine, that survives days without great emotions. But what Daniel didn't see, and perhaps couldn't see, was the subtle way small cracks were forming. She started going out a little more. First for an extension course, then for school events, planning meetings, coffee with colleagues. Daniel didn't suspect anything. Not out of naivete, but out of trust. Because, over the years, they had built something that, in his mind, was strong enough to withstand the temporary distance, the tight schedules, the natural changes of phase. But there was an almost imperceptible detail: Emily stopped sharing. The days began to be narrated with less detail. The dialogues became drier. The kisses, shorter. And even so, Daniel remained there, believing that love was also made of phases like that, of periods in which one holds on tighter when the other lets go a little. In the weeks leading up to the company party, Daniel noticed that Emily spoke with unusual enthusiasm about her work. She talked about a new project, a new director involved, a restructuring that promised to bring more dynamism to the school. She spoke faster, her eyes shining, like someone who felt again that passion she had always had for her profession. And he, once again, supported her. He said he was proud, that she deserved recognition, that she was a brilliant professional. Emily smiled, thanked him, and kissed him on the forehead as one thanks an old friend for his understanding. But there was something strange about that kiss. An absence of desire, of urgency, of warmth. Something Daniel tried to ignore, attributing it to tiredness, stress, the accumulation of commitments. On the day of the party, everything seemed normal. Emily got ready with her usual care, choosing a dress he always complimented. She asked if she looked pretty, and he said, as always. She smiled, but not with her eyes. They went together, greeted colleagues, laughed at jokes that weren't even that funny, took photos that she would later post on social media with generic captions about gratitude and achievements. Daniel watched her dance with her colleagues, chatting animatedly, circulating with a glass of wine in her hand and a sparkle in her eyes that he hadn't seen in a long time. And it was there, in that environment full of smiles and side conversations, that an imperceptible change began to take shape. He wouldn't be able to explain later what made him leave the table, what led him to look towards the door at the exact moment she left. Maybe it was the sudden silence, maybe it was instinct, or just an insignificant movement. But it was there, in that second when his eyes followed her to the parking lot, that the line between before and after began to be drawn. He stood still, motionless for a few seconds, trying to understand what he was seeing. Emily opening the car door of another man. Laughing. Leaving without saying goodbye. Daniel didn't feel anger at that moment. He felt a strangeness, as if he had been thrown out of a movie he'd been watching for years. As if reality had turned upside down without warning. He grabbed his coat, left without saying anything, and followed the car. The road ahead was a thin line between what he knew and what he was about to discover. And although he didn't yet know what he would find, there was an unsettling feeling inside him, a truth silently forming. The fate of that night was still unknown. But one certainty was beginning to grow: what would happen from then on would change everything. And the story that had previously seemed so solid, so secure, so full of plans, was about to be rewritten in a way that none of them had imagined. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. Daniel parked the car with the headlights off at a safe distance, almost as if afraid to shine too much light on something he might prefer never to see. The parking lot behind that sophisticated restaurant was dimly lit, but not enough to hide what was already evident. Emily got out of her boss's car with a light, knowing smile, and opened her arms to him as if the world around her didn't exist. There was no kiss, but the intimacy between them screamed. It was a silent dance of rehearsed glances and gestures. When she opened the door to get out and came face to face with Daniel standing there, his eyes fixed on hers, time seemed to stop. Her smile died instantly. Her body froze. She didn't say a word, and neither did he. Because it wasn't necessary. That night, there was no fight, no shouting, no scene. There was only a cold, dry goodbye, and the phrase he uttered in a low voice, like a lament from the depths of his heart: "You destroyed more than a marriage." And he left. He left behind not only the woman he loved, but the entire future he had planned with her. Emily, alone, stared at the spot where his car had been seconds before, as if she didn't comprehend the magnitude of her own choice. But the real impact didn't come that night. It came later. In the days that followed, when his absence became more concrete than any presence she had ever had. When his silence began to weigh more than all the conversations they had had. She tried to contact him days later, but he didn't answer. She wrote a letter, which he never replied to. Time passed, and with it, the relationship with her boss also fell apart. There were no promises, no continuity. He had gotten what he wanted, a distraction, a conquest. And then he discarded her, with the same ease with which one throws away a used plastic cup. Emily didn't have the courage to tell her close friends. She kept up appearances for as long as possible. And then, when she realized that no one cared anymore, that everyone had distanced themselves, including the co-workers who used to smile at her in the hallways, the whole truth fell on her shoulders. She had thrown away the only true love she had ever had for something that couldn't even withstand the first silence. She continued living alone for a while, then moved to a smaller, more secluded apartment. Her social media accounts became inactive, and the messages she sent to Daniel went unanswered. Until one day, months later, as she turned a corner in the park they used to visit on Sundays, she saw a scene that cut like a razor. Daniel, holding hands with another woman, carried a little girl on his shoulders. The three of them were smiling, and there was a naturalness between them that seemed ancient, as if that bond had been built with deep roots. Emily stopped, motionless, as he had been that night in the parking lot. Her heart raced, and for a moment she thought about approaching. But she couldn't. The girl's laughter echoed through the air, and Daniel looked up, smiling with his eyes, as he had never smiled at her in ages. Emily slowly stepped back, her chest heavy, trying to process what she had just seen. In the following days, she discovered who the woman was, an old acquaintance, someone Emily never imagined seeing by his side. Someone who, silently, had taken him in when she had broken him. It wasn't just the fact that he was with someone else. It was the kind of peace he exuded now, as if he had left all the noise behind. And there, on the bathroom floor of her apartment, Emily cried like never before. She cried not only for having lost him, but for realizing that he had finally found what he had always sought, a home where there was love, respect, and truth. A few weeks later, in a fit of desperation and regret, Emily appeared at Daniel's door. He hesitated before opening it. Her eyes were red, her shoulders hunched, and she held a crumpled letter between her fingers. She said she needed to talk, that she needed to be heard, that she needed to say everything she never had the courage to. Daniel took a deep breath, went out onto the balcony with her, and they sat in silence for a few minutes before any words were spoken. She began by saying that she didn't expect forgiveness, but that she needed to say how sorry she was. She said that what she felt for him was real, that she had never forgotten him, that every day she woke up with the memory of what she had lost. She said she was wrong, that she was weak, that she confused neediness with desire, attention with love. She said that, deep down, she knew that that man would never love her as Daniel loved her. Daniel listened without interrupting. His eyes fixed on the horizon, as if searching far away for the words he needed to say. And when she finished, her voice choked with emotion, expecting some reaction, he simply said that he had forgiven her. But that forgiveness didn't mean going back. That he had rebuilt his own life with the pieces she had left behind. That, in the beginning, there was pain, yes, but there was also a decision. And that, with time, he had learned that loving isn't just feeling. It's choosing. And that, when she chose another path, he chose to follow it whole, even if alone. She tried to insist, asking if there was still a part of him that loved her. He stared at her for long seconds before answering. He said that, yes, a part of him would always remember her fondly. But that this part wasn't enough to start over. That love, when betrayed, doesn't return the same. That it may even survive, but it never breathes the same way again. And then she knew. She knew, deep in her soul, that she had lost. Not because of just one mistake, but because of a succession of decisions that distanced her further and further from what truly mattered. In the days that followed, Emily tried to find meaning in her new reality. She tried to move on, but the memories came in waves, and the worst of them wasn't the moment of discovery. It was the day in the park. The day she saw, with her own eyes, the love she had destroyed blossoming elsewhere. The little girl on Daniel's shoulders, laughing, calling him Dad, with the naturalness of someone who feels safe and belongs. And the woman beside her, smiling knowingly. That was what she had thrown away for a fantasy. And there, in that park, without anyone noticing, she understood that losing the love of someone like Daniel was more than losing a man. It was losing a unique chance to live a whole, sincere story, built with patience and devotion. Time passed, but for Emily, the nights remained long. She dreamed of him often, but the dreams were always the same. He smiled, turned his back, and left with another woman. And each time she woke up, the emptiness on the right side of the bed seemed deeper. It wasn't the silence that hurt, it was the absence of what that silence meant. The absence of a home, of a hug, of a, "it's okay," that only Daniel knew how to say. She never contacted him again. She understood that there were boundaries that, once crossed, couldn't be crossed again. And Daniel, even having forgiven her, never looked back. He moved on with his life with his new partner, creating real bonds, breathing peace, living the kind of love that doesn't need grand declarations to exist. And whenever someone asked him about the past, he would just smile slightly and say, "Some stories end not because the love ended, but because respect went away first." And it was true. Because, in the end, Emily didn't lose Daniel because she loved him less. You lost him because you chose wrong. Because you confused vanity with freedom. And because, when he had the chance to build, he chose to destroy. And there lay the true secret of this story: the most painful punishment isn't being betrayed. It's realizing that you destroyed what you needed most, and that nothing, absolutely nothing, can bring it back. Life has a silent way of adjusting everything in its own time. Sometimes not with immediate justice, but with irrefutable consequences. After their last encounter, the weeks passed like a long, silent winter. Emily returned home with empty eyes, as if carrying the weight of her own failure. There were no screams, no fury, only that opaque emptiness one feels when realizing that the person one loves now belongs to another world. And worse, a world that was once ours. Her loss wasn't sudden, it was a slow-motion collapse. One second after another, she began to understand what she had actually done. It wasn't just betrayal. It was destroying a bond that could never be rebuilt in the same way. It was tearing from his life something he had built with time, respect, and unconditional love. And the cruelest thing of all was knowing that he had survived, overcome, and rediscovered love, while she wandered among the memories of a life that could no longer be touched. Emily spent her days in silence, looking at objects that once held life and now only occupied space. The toothbrush was still there. The book he started reading and never finished rested on the dresser as a reminder of the unfinished story. The curtains she had chosen so carefully, the living room cushions, the blue mug that had been his and that she still used without realizing it. Small things, fragments of a home that no longer existed. He tried to occupy his mind with work, but his energy was broken. The lightness she conveyed in class was replaced by a distant look, and the students began to notice. The corridors she once walked with confidence now seemed too long. The brilliance that made her stand out faded, until she became just another presence among many. There was a moment, one late afternoon, when she sat alone on the sofa and mentally revisited all the small choices that had led her there. Every message answered with enthusiasm, every meeting disguised as a get-together, every lie told while looking into the eyes of someone who trusted her. And then, she understood that the betrayal didn't begin with the act. It began with the choice to hide, with the omission, with the silent disrespect. She didn't just lose a man. She lost her own dignity, and with it, the respect of everyone who knew her story. The friends who used to invite her out disappeared one by one. Some knew what had happened, others only noticed the change and preferred silence to closeness. The world she knew collapsed in slow motion, and no one stayed to hold up the rubble. On the other side of town, Daniel's life moved at a different pace. Without haste, without noise, but with a solidity he had never felt before. Beside Sarah, he found a kind of love that didn't demand daily proof, that didn't need grand words. It was in the gesture, in the gaze, in the comfortable silence between two bodies that understood each other. Sarah's daughter adopted him with the naturalness only a child can possess. And Daniel, little by little, found in the fatherhood that didn't come from blood, but from shared experiences, a new meaning for his existence. He held no resentment. What had passed stayed where it should, in the past. But the learning remained. Daniel became more attentive, more careful, more grateful. Not because he was afraid of being betrayed again, but because he understood that life is too fragile to be lived in halves. Sarah knew his story. She never asked for details, but he told her. He told her so she would know where he came from, and why it sometimes took him longer to trust. She listened with empathy, without judgment. She told him he didn't need to rush, that she would be there, fully present, as long as he was there with her too. And so they built something new, something incomparable, but full of truth. Daniel rediscovered the pleasure of small things, preparing dinner together, teaching math to the girl, lying in the hammock and watching the sunset in silence. He, who had previously lived bound by commitments, began to value time as the most precious thing. Not because he wanted to escape the past, but because now he knew what it meant to have a full present. Emily remained trapped in her memories. She tried to meet other people, but everything seemed empty. It wasn't a lack of companionship, it was an absence of connection. The conversations were lukewarm, the encounters brief, the hugs unwarm. No one saw her as Daniel did. And perhaps no one ever would again. Life went on, but she was left behind. In a final attempt to reclaim some part of who she once was, she wrote a text. She published it on an anonymous blog. It was a kind of confession, without names, but with every detail drenched in truth. She spoke of regret, of loss, of how betrayal doesn't begin when you kiss someone else, but when you disrespect someone who trusted you. The text went viral. Many women identified with it, others criticized it. But for Emily, it was a form of liberation. For the first time, she publicly admitted what she had always known internally: she had destroyed her own future by not recognizing what she had. Daniel never read the text. He never knew about it. Not because he wasn't interested, but because, at that point, he had already disconnected from it. He didn't feed on memories, he didn't seek to give new meaning to what was already over. He continued his life lightly. He loved with presence. He walked consciously. When he met mutual friends again, they spoke little about the past. He only said that some wounds, when well cared for, become scars that teach, and no longer hurt. And that was Daniel's greatest victory, not carrying bitterness, not wishing ill, just moving forward knowing that he had survived the worst and found the best. A year later, in a simple ceremony in the countryside, Daniel and Sarah got married. Few guests, a sunny afternoon, her daughter holding the rings with a wide smile. There was no ostentation. Just truth. Daniel looked into Sarah's eyes and said, in a firm voice, that she was his home, and that he thanked God every day for having found serene love after the storm. Meanwhile, Emily watched from afar, not knowing exactly why she still followed parts of his life. Perhaps to punish herself, perhaps out of hope. But that day, seeing the wedding photo on social media, she finally understood, there was no longer a place for her there. And that's okay. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about what he built after her. If you've made it this far, comment below what you thought of this story. Do you think she deserved a second chance? Or do you believe he did the right thing by moving on and starting over? Your opinion is very important to us. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our stories. Here, every plot has a lesson, every ending carries a truth. And the truth of this story is clear: betrayal destroys. It corrodes what took years to build. It kills respect, poisons love, and robs the other person of the security of being loved completely. There is no excuse capable of undoing what has been done. There is regret, yes. But not all regret finds a way back. Because sometimes forgiveness comes, but trust, that never returns in the same way. Remember, this channel does not support any type of betrayal. The stories told here are fictional, but the feelings are real. They are reflections of the pain that many live in silence. May they serve as a warning. May they serve as a mirror. And, above all, may they serve as a lesson. Until the next story.